Today, we're going to be talking about sales velocity and how to accelerate it with proposals. Before we get into the proposal piece, let's talk about sales velocity in general. I don't hear the term thrown around as often as it was maybe a few years ago. I know it's something that is kind of big in SaaS. Other more traditional types of industries don't necessarily use it, but I think that they could use it, or at least I view it as a metric, not necessarily as a metric, but what does it break down to? So, sales velocity is basically a calculation that comes from an equation of really the four key metrics that sales are going to be looking at a higher level when it comes to your opportunity. So not so much the leading indicators or the, necessarily outbound metrics or number of dials or that sort of thing, but really just when you look at your pipeline, there are four numbers that really matter when you want to look at how do we get more sales in the door? How do we increase our speed or velocity And so those four numbers that make up the equation are how many opportunities do I have in my pipeline? What is the average deal value? So if you sell like a 10K ACV, average contract value or annual contract value, that's your deal value. And then there's your close rate. What percentage of opportunities close? And so those are three sort of numbers that you combine together or multiply together. And then they get divided by the average length of your sales cycle. So how many days does your sales cycle typically run? Let's say it's a 30-day or a 60-day. That's going to divide that number that you multiply at the top, and that will generate your sales velocity. So it's a fairly simple equation if you know those four inputs. The number itself doesn't really matter so much as it is the fact that you're tracking it on a regular basis, and you can see if your velocity is going up, then one of those numbers is improving. So the idea is that if I can lower the sales cycle or increase the number of opportunities or get a higher close rate or increase the deal value, if any of those things is true, then my velocity goes up.
Yeah, sales velocity, the core elements of it, I think, are all super important in terms of number of deals, deal value, win rate, and the sales cycle length. And to your point, it's only as good as how you track it and tracking it over time. And like if you look at it just in one snapshot, it's going to mean absolutely nothing. It's something that we've tracked, and that was where I found the biggest sort of hiccup with it is everyone in the company needs to have a really good understanding of like, number one, what it means, but then what is good and where are we at? And I think that is where you just need to establish baseline and where does it go from there? Because if you don't, you're just going to look at a number that no one knows what it means.
Yeah, in isolation, it means nothing. Like if the number's 50 or if it's 500, it's like, what does that actually mean? But it's like, oh, it doubled over the last 3 months. Okay, that's pretty notable. That's when you want to break it down and be like, something changed in a good way, or it's going down, which could mean maybe all your other numbers hold true except your deal cycle has ballooned to 90 days where it was 160. That's where you want to dig in. So it really just gives you something to look at to go, okay, where there's smoke, there's fire. So I should probably dig into that and see what's going on. What we wanted to look at now that you kind of know what sales velocity is how does the proposal fit in there? Proposal often takes a back seat in a lot of cases. We sort of look at it as a sort of necessary thing, an afterthought, if you will. But your proposal can have a huge impact on sales velocity in general. Let's look at each of those four numbers and how your proposal might impact that number in a positive way if you do it right, or maybe negatively impact if you don't. The one I want to look at is maybe the least noted one or doesn't come up as often, but it's the number of opportunities. Now, why would your proposal impact the number of opportunities? It's when we've talked to customers who have adopted Proposify, a lot of times they'll say things like, because I was on a case study the other day, a case study call with one of our customers in the IT services space. And he said before Proposify, they were taking about days, sometimes weeks to get a proposal out. And now it takes them 10 to 20 minutes. So, and we don't sell Proposify on speed. That's not really like the main benefit, but it is a benefit. But I think the bigger thing that it does is say that companies that are used to these like long drawn out processes for creating proposals will sometimes turn down opportunities because of the time it takes, where like maybe a smaller opportunity, they're just not even going to respond to at all because they're like, it's just not worth the time. But if it only takes them 10 minutes to send out a proposal, why not? So it actually increases the total number of opportunities, even if all the other numbers stay the same.
Yeah, that's one way you can increase your total number of opportunities is by a more efficient proposal process, allowing you to get to more deals and sell to more people. The other thing that's interesting is if you think about the proposal itself, of course, you're going to have your core offering in the proposal based on your discovery and all these things that you're sending to your prospect. Sometimes you may add in some additional services or add on things that you may be able to do with them later. So things that lead into other engagements. So naturally, you're actually building some more opportunities off that as well. And then we all know that people share proposals, whether we want them to or not. And if you have one that looks really awesome and very clear on the value you provide, at least if that gets passed around, it might actually lead to, oh, I got your proposal from so-and-so. We want to do business together too. We see that in our world just from people using Proposify and then learning what the underlying technology is and saying, geez, where'd you guys get that? And we get leads through that. So I think any business can see that happen as well, which is going to create more opportunities. If you're just always putting your best foot forward in your proposals, you look professional, you look like you know what you're doing, you're kind of establishing yourself in the market as a leader, and that can pay off in other ways.
The other one is the deal size. So we've talked about this before, but if you present just one price, then there's really no room there's no wiggle room, there's no negotiation room unless you do a lot of back and forth, and that can slow down your deal cycle. So, but if you just do like a good, better, best model or a packaging model or a core plus more, which is like, here's the main price, but you can add these other things on and you can also combine them. So you can say like, here's the good, better, best, pick the middle tier, but then there's also some additional add-ons. If you can just make your pricing more modular and allow customers to upsell themselves, then that can be one of the ways that you increase the deal size.
So often, if you want to increase deal size, one thing you can do is just give people the option to do so when they're signing off or agreeing to the proposal. So if you're sending them something static, meaning they can't change anything, then how are they going to do that? Well, they might be able to reach out to you, but sometimes that barrier just leads people to say, oh, I'll start with what's here, and then if I need more, I'll ask them or what have you. So we find when there's interactive tables in the proposals that share the pricing, that just gives the customer the ability to self-select in to the bigger package, that additional service, and ultimately you'll see deal sizes grow pretty passively just by giving them that option.
The third metric in the multiplication equation of sales velocity is close rate, and that one is really nuanced and there's a lot behind it. And if you want to check out another video that we did around stated proposals research, there's all kinds of little things that you can do that can increase the close rate. And I won't get into all those things, but I guess one of the caveats of being able to respond to more opportunities and be able to send more proposals is that realistically your close rate is probably going to go down. And the reason I say that is because outside of a proposal, close rate is one of those things where so much of it depends on how much risk you're able to accept into your pipeline, right? Like if you only accept those, what did you call them? Bluebirds, like the lead that's like hot, ready to buy, they come in, they're basically like, shut up, take my money. Then yeah, you're going to have a high close rate. But if you take kind of like weaker deals where there's not as like you only have one champion and it's not multi-threaded, or you can help solve some of their problem, but you can't solve all of it. Like there's so many factors that come back to really good discovery that is going to really impact your close rate more than what goes into the proposal. So if you're willing to deal with a lower close rate, but essentially just be able to respond to more volume at the top, that is something where improving one number might weaken another number.
Yeah, and if I was kind of to take the maybe counter argument, I think one thing you can do if you really focus on your proposals to improve close rate is if you get visibility into what's happening with the proposal, so you send it out and you know how the prospect interacts, that can really change your follow-up approach, can help you close more of them versus if you just sent a static PDF and you didn't know that information. So if you can't see where someone spends time in the proposal and how long they've been in there, it kind of puts you at a disadvantage. And therefore, there could be times where you don't follow up properly and that leads you to lose the deal. So your close rate would go down from that. So that's one way that with interactive, online proposals like Proposify, you could see more deals close. The other is when you're tying the proposal into your CRM, managers have a better view into just what's out there. And some of it just comes down to coaching the reps on how to, number one,
even though you might know when to follow up, how are you following up, right? So getting some coaching on that piece can help you win deals that you may otherwise lose. And just frankly, not losing track of everything because it's in your proposal solution with the pipeline view of everything that you've sent. It's also in your CRM. And so there's just less falling through the cracks. So if you're taking in more volume, ideally, maybe you can hold your close rate. Maybe it's not going to go up, but in a perfect world, you probably want to try to hold it as close as to where it was before. So you really actually get the velocity going. And those are some things that can help you do that.
Yeah. And I want to make it clear as well that we're talking about Proposify, which I know is sort of a shameless plug for it. Really, there's other ways to accomplish this if you don't use dedicated proposal software. It's just that you have to usually stitch together a lot more tools, right? So like you can make your proposal process a lot faster just even if you're still using Word or Google Slides or PowerPoint, by using better templates and better naming conventions and more, placeholder text that makes it easy for reps to know what to change. Like there are ways to do this using traditional software. We're not saying you can only do this if you use our product, but it is just whether it's ours or one of our competitors, using some proposal software will make it a whole lot easier and mean that, instead of using 4 or 5 different tools to accomplish the same thing, you can do it in one. And then there's sales cycle. So this is the only metric that's really like you subtract from your sales velocity, because obviously the longer your sales cycle, the worse it is for your sales. So ideally you want to cut this down as low as you possibly can. And I think this is one of the areas where improving your proposal process is going to have a really big impact on your sales cycle. I've told this story before. This isn't a separate episode, so it's why I'm being repetitive about, going through a buying process where essentially I was really interested and keen on buying. But then the proposal process was so clunky and so drawn out where, I had to wait and email the rep back and ask where the proposal was. And, it was another department doing it. It was admin or finance doing it. And then they sent it as a DocuSign with a different name, so I didn't recognize it. And then it was full of legalese. And I just didn't end up, it created so much friction in the buying experience that it took probably a month for me to buy when I could have probably bought the same day I had the call with the rep. So again, not necessarily needing to use dedicated proposal software, but it is an example of where if you can just tighten up that process internally and look at how does this come across as a buyer, putting yourself in their shoes, it can really tighten up that sales cycle and get it down to days when maybe it was taking weeks or even months.
Yeah, delaying getting a proposal to someone who wants to buy is a big no-no, and it's like just putting pressure on both sides and unneeded stress for a salesperson. It's like at that point, just don't fumble the bag, right? You just want to get the deal done, and so being able to get the proposal out there quickly is like paramount to that. And the reality is like the proposal, if you have a template and you've done proper discovery and you've asked all the right questions, shouldn't take you that long, regardless of how you put that together, whether it's Google, PowerPoint, it's a tool like Proposify. So just set yourself up for success by establishing that foundation and then doing the right thing in the sales cycle early on so that it doesn't become this big arduous project at the end.
How often do you send a proposal to a prospect and, they just look at the price and they never get back to you? Right? It's very common. There's ways that you can get ahead of this and ways that you can reduce the likelihood, that it's going to happen and both increase the close rate and tighten up the sales cycle. So one of these things is mainly around close rate is just don't send the proposal to the prospect, right? Like obviously you're going to have to send it to them at some point, but ideally you've got a call booked on the calendar. And even better is they don't even get to see the proposal until they've had the call. So you actually get them on a call, walk them through the proposal, really step by step, make sure you get ahead of any objections so that if they see something that they're like we didn't talk about this before, or whatever confusion they have when they're looking at the proposal, you as the seller are able to address it right there, as opposed to if you just send it and they look at it, on their own, they might get cold feet and then just never reply to you.
Yeah, definitely. When you're ready to get to the proposal stage, you want to review it with your prospect first and then send it. That's ideal world. Sometimes that can't happen. Sometimes it's expectations on the buyer's side. They really push you for it. They're like, I need the proposal today. Number one, I start asking myself as the seller why that is, because sometimes that means it's so they can negotiate with another offering. But another way to do sort of a asynchronous proposal review is to leverage video. So recording yourself, basically having a one-way conversation with the person, walking them through the proposal. So we've even tried this at Proposify in sort of a step fashion, which has worked sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. But how you do it is you record the video, you walk through the proposal, you send the video, someone watches the video, which you get a notification of, and then you send the physical document once you know that they've checked out the video, just so that you don't send both and then basically they ignore your video and just go right to the proposal and you're at the same point you were at before. So that's one thing we've tried and it's worked a few times. And then sometimes you try that and they still don't check your video out, and you likely, you try to get back in contact with them and you may end up sending the proposal as sort of the last resort. And hey, that's okay. But I think it's the intention of trying to make sure that you can cover off as much as you can before it gets sent, so that's gonna reduce that sales cycle as much as possible.
I've heard of a customer once say, and maybe a few of them have actually said this over the years, that they use that view notification as sort of the trigger for them to follow up. So like you said, you can't, sometimes in a perfect world, we'd always walk them through it. And especially with their smaller deals, you may actually not want to do that all the time. But if you do just send it to them, if you get a notification when they open it, then that's a perfect time to literally call them or send them a text if you have their number. Maybe creepy, I don't know, but to be like, oh, I saw you were looking at the proposal. Maybe you don't want to mention it. I don't know how people tend to react to that, or you just like, I had a customer once say that like, oh, I just say, well, maybe it was meant to be then, that I just happen to be calling like right after you view the proposal. But that can be just a way that you're able to use that insight and that data to actually know when to follow up, because it's obviously on their mind. They're looking at it. They're thinking about it. Why wouldn't that be the best time to talk to them?
Yeah, exactly. If you have some indication that someone's been looking at your proposal, it's probably a good time to follow up. And if you were not using proposal software, most email tools now will at least show you like email opens and views. So you could even gauge it off that a little bit. Like, oh, this email got viewed 10 times. Probably worth, picking up the phone. Hey, what are your questions about the proposal? Whenever I ask someone about the proposal, I always assume they've been into it and they have questions. I think some of the questions that people use are throwaways, like, hey, have you had a chance to look at the proposal? It's like, is that really what you want to know? No, you want to know, like, what do they think about what's in it? So I think just like ask a question that's meaningful and assumptive. And then if they haven't, a lot of times when people get asked a question like that, what do you think they do? They go look at it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, Dan Hebert, who used to work at Proposify, used to always say, what are your questions instead of, do you have questions? I don't know psychologically why that works better, but it's just that, you always go like, oh, do you have any questions? And people go, no. But then when you go, what are your questions? You assume they do. So, it gets people talking more. And I think maybe it's the same in a sales cycle. It's just like, not have you looked at the proposal, which is just kind of a dumb question.
Yeah. The what questions are open-ended. What, how, those are the best ones. Have you is kind of open-ended, is probably a little bit murky, but
well, it's kind of a binary question, right? It's like, yeah. Have you looked at it? Yes. Okay.
Great. Now what? Yeah. So I find Dan was a master of that for sure. What are your questions? What's going through your mind is one he used to tell me or ask me all the time in one-on-ones. So shout out to Dan.
It's funny you said 10, you looked at the proposal 10 times. I know I think you were just coming up with a random number, but you'd be interested to know when we look at the number of views, it was actually 10 views on average for winning proposals. It's higher than it has been in recent years. There was a 1 year where it was like, if it was like over 2 or 3 views, I think after 3 views, it started the chance of it closing declined. It takes, on average, now this is across a very large customer base, so take the average as you will, but like 80 minutes to open a proposal on average. So, okay, that's about an hour and a half. Makes sense. That's probably about when people check their email, and if they know they're getting a proposal, they're going to open it right away. I know I do when I see a proposal come in the door from a vendor or another company that I'm buying from. And then from there, it takes about 51 hours to close, which is actually surprisingly fast. I would, and I think this probably changes a lot when it comes to deal size. Very small deals are going to close within literally a day or more. whereas a bigger deal could take a whole lot longer. But then it's about 10 views. So people are like opening it within a day period. They're like closing it, opening it 10 times to win a proposal.
I think the views, like having 10 views be the average of a winning proposal. Am I getting that data right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Could be across multiple contacts too.
Right. So that's the point I was going to make. I think 10 views being the average for a winning proposal speaks to there being more buying committees these days, more people and stakeholders involved in deals. And so I would wager that those are multiple people viewing it and going back and forth and making sure everyone's comfortable before you sign off. So that's probably a sign of the times where, like a few years ago, the market was hot in terms of, in our world, with software purchases. A lot of people were buying software because people were working more remote and all these good things for us. There was likely less people involved because decisions were being made quicker. They just needed tools in the door. Now everything's slowed down, budgets are tighter, more people want to get involved and see things before the decisions are made. So it definitely resonates with our world in terms of what we've seen in how people are buying. And so I'm guessing that's probably trickling into other industries.
Yeah, that's right. In the 2021 days, where people were, as I say, spending like drunk sailors, is like everybody had a different tool, their favorite tool, but it did the same thing. Yeah. And so more in recent years, like businesses like ours have consolidated a lot of tools. They'd be like, well, why do we have 3-4 tools that do the same thing for different departments? Why don't we cut it down and just, use one thing for one tool for everybody? And, it's not always fun to make those changes internally, but it is, I think, a reality of the world we're living in. So like you said, more people involved, more stakeholders, more closer scrutiny of deals happening. And one of the other ways to create a sense of, or to reduce the sales cycle and increase the close rate is actually putting an expiration date. We've talked about this before, but, not just leaving it open-ended. Buyers are their own worst enemies sometimes, and they will often default to just, defer it, delay the decision. Even if they're living with pain, it's still, they're dealing with whatever problem you're solving for them is easier sometimes than making a decision to purchase a tool or buy a service that will make that pain go away. So if you can just put an expiration date, and if the software can do this too, if you're using software like Proposify can do this, is you can just put an expiration date so that after the date, it just won't even be viewable and they'll have to contact you. And that can create a little bit of that. It's almost like, I know it might sound sleazy, but those like ClickFunnels pages where it shows you the timer, the countdown of like how long this is valid for, or like you purchase movie tickets sometimes or plane tickets, it'll be like there's a timer of like 10 minutes before this goes away and you have to put in your credit card. That's totally a marketing psychology thing, right? Is having a time constraint will increase, like it will just, people will buy more and they'll be more likely to buy if there's a time constraint.
Yeah, I think a proposal expiry can help you ensure you don't have closed sales cycle lengths that extend super long. You want to align those expiries with obviously timelines that you've discussed with your customer, but I think if everyone's aware of those dates, then it's fair game to include them. And don't know the name of the law, but there's that law that people just take as long as they have to do something. So if you give them a week, they're going to take a week. If you give them a month, they're going to take a month. So it's something to factor in. I always suggest, if possible, the default is to put an expiry date at the end of a month. That's like I don't know why humans are wired that way. Put it in the middle of the month. Put it at the 15th. Because if there are legitimate things that may actually delay the deal, as a salesperson, usually you're working on a month or a quarter. So you'd rather have some buffer to get the deal done versus you thought it was going to be the last day of the month, but now something came up. So now you're pushed into the next month and your manager's all over you because your forecast sucks. So that's what I would recommend, is try to actually offset your deals so that they're closing more middle of the month. The other thing that lets you do as a salesperson is start to focus on the next month and not, scrambling to close deals at the end.
That's a huge tip, because it is the thing we see all the time, right? End of quarter or end of month is like when everything closes on the last day.
Yeah.
And then it just creates a lot of spikes in your metrics, in your finances.
And your mental health.
And your mental health as well. Well, so that's covered it. I think This is how you can use a proposal. Obviously there's a lot of factors that happen outside of just a proposal, but I think hopefully what people got from this is that if you've been overlooking your proposal process, if you've just been looking at it as a sort of transactional, necessary evil, and you just sort of don't give it a lot of thought, then the proposal could be actually what's holding you back from closing more revenue. And with just paying a little bit of attention to it, that could be one of the things that increases your sales velocity. And obviously, if you haven't been tracking it or even the numbers that go into sales velocity, that is something that you can start doing today. So hope you found it helpful and valuable, and we'll talk to you next time.